The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Sunset Manor Nursing Home in Portland, Oregon, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the parking lot below. Harold Matthews, 78, sat in his wheelchair by the window of his small room, clutching his old flip phone with trembling hands. The device felt heavier each day, not from his weight, but from the burden of unanswered calls. Room 237, lunchtime, called Maria, one of the cheerful nurses who had become more family to him than his own blood in these past 6 months. Harold barely looked up. "I'm not hungry, Maria. Maybe later." She approached with the gentle patience that made her exceptional at her job. "Mr. Matthews, you missed breakfast too. Your doctor said you need to keep your strength up." "For what?" Harold's voice cracked. "So I can sit here another day waiting for a call that'll never come?" The truth hung heavy in the sterile air. 6 months ago, his son David had driven him here in his pristine BMW, promising it was just temporary while they figured out a better arrangement. The last thing David had said was, "I'll call you tonight, Dad." That was 183 days ago. Harold had counted every single one. Maria sat on the edge of his bed, her scrubs rustling softly. "You know, Mr. Matthews, sometimes the people we're waiting for aren't the ones who end up mattering most." Harold turned from the window, confused by her cryptic comment. "What do you mean?" "Well," Maria smiled mysteriously, "there's someone who's been asking about you. Every Wednesday, like clockwork. Been coming for about 2 months now." Harold's heart skipped. "David? Has David been?" "No, sir. It's a woman. Middle-aged, always dressed nicely. She brings fresh flowers and asks how you're doing. Never gives her name, just says she's a friend of the family." Harold stared at Maria, bewildered. I don't know any woman who would." His voice trailed off as he tried to process this information. In his isolation, he'd become so focused on David's silence that he'd barely noticed anything else happening around him. "She was here this morning. Actually, left these for you." Maria walked to his bedside table and picked up a small bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums tied with a simple brown ribbon. Said yellow was for friendship and remembrance. Harold reached out with shaking hands to touch the delicate petals. They were fresh, still dewy. Real flowers, not the artificial ones that decorated most of the common areas. Someone had spent money on these. Someone had thought of him. Did she say anything else? Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "She asked if you had everything you needed. When I told her you barely eat and spend most days by the window, she looked so sad. She said, 'Some people don't realize what they have until it's gone, but others never forget kindness, no matter how small.'" The phone in Harold's lap buzzed once, a low battery warning. He'd been charging it obsessively, hoping for that one call that would change everything. But now, holding these flowers, he felt something shift inside him. Someone out there knew he existed. Someone cared enough to drive to this place every week and spend money on flowers for a forgotten old man. "Maria," he said softly, "next Wednesday, when she comes, could you maybe introduce us?" Maria's face lit up with the first genuine smile Harold had seen from anyone in months. "I think she'd like that very much, Mr. Matthews. In fact, I think she's been hoping you'd ask." As Harold placed the flowers in the small vase by his window, the autumn sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day, casting golden light across the yellow petals. For the first time in 183 days, Harold wasn't thinking about his phone. He was thinking about Wednesday. Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Portland could bring. Harold had spent the past 3 days doing something he hadn't done since arriving at Sunset Manor. He'd engaged with life. He'd eaten his meals, taken his medications without argument, and even attended a morning activity session where residents played bingo and listened to old music. "Well, look who decided to join the living," teased Janet, an 82-year-old former librarian who played a mean hand of poker and had been trying to befriend Harold for months. "I'm just curious about something," Harold admitted, adjusting his best shirt, a blue button-down that David had packed for him months ago. "About your mysterious flower lady." Janet's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Word travels fast around here. Honey, we're all dying to know who she is." Harold felt his cheeks warm. It's probably nobody important. Maybe just someone from the church or a volunteer. Volunteers don't come every Wednesday for 2 months straight, said Frank, a Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke but noticed everything. And they don't spend their own money on fresh flowers. At exactly 2:15 p.m., Harold positioned himself in the main lobby, his wheelchair angled so he could see the front entrance through the glass doors. Maria had promised to fetch him when his visitor arrived, but Harold was too nervous to wait in his room. The October afternoon light filtered through the lobby's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished linoleum floor. Harold's hands fidgeted with the arm of his wheelchair as each car pulled into the parking lot. A blue sedan, not her. A red pickup truck, definitely not her. Then, at 2:32 p.m., a modest gray Honda Civic parked near the entrance. Harold's breath caught as he watched a woman in her mid-50s step out. She was average height, with shoulder-length brown hair touched with silver, wearing a navy cardigan and simple jeans. In her hands, she carried a fresh bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums, just like the ones that now brightened his room. She moved with purpose, but also with a gentleness that Harold could sense even from a distance. As she approached the entrance, Harold noticed something that made his heart race. She looked nervous, too, glancing at the building as if she was gathering courage. Maria appeared at Harold's side. "Ready, Mr. Matthews?" Harold nodded, though his throat felt dry. The woman entered the lobby, and Maria approached her with a warm smile. "Excuse me, miss. There's someone I'd like you to meet." The woman turned, and Harold found himself looking into kind hazel eyes that seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. She wore no makeup, but her face had a natural warmth that reminded him of someone from long ago. "Mr. Matthews," Maria said gently, "I'd like you to meet your Wednesday visitor." The woman stepped forward, clutching the flowers. "Hello, Mr. Matthews. I'm Sarah. Sarah Chun." Harold stared at her, the name echoing in his mind. Sarah Chun. Where had he heard that name? "I'm sorry," Harold said slowly. "Have we met before? You seem—" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "We met once, a very long time ago. I wasn't sure you'd remember. It was 1987, and I was 8 years old." Harold's mind raced back through the decades. 1987. He would have been 45, still working as a mechanic at Thompson's auto shop downtown. David would have been 15, just learning to drive. "You probably don't remember," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion, "but you changed my life that day." The pieces began clicking together slowly, like an old engine finally turning over. Harold's eyes widened as the memory surfaced. A rainy evening in November 1987. The shop already closed, but he'd stayed late to finish a job. A small Asian girl, soaking wet and crying, had appeared at the shop's bay door. "Oh, my God," Harold whispered. "You're the little girl with the bicycle." Sarah nodded, tears now flowing freely. "You remember? Your bike chain had broken, and you were trying to get home before dark," Harold said, the memory flooding back with startling clarity. "You were crying because your mother would be worried, and you didn't have money for a bus. And you," Sarah's voice broke, "you not only fixed my chain for free, but you drove me home in your truck. You waited until you saw my mother open the door and know I was safe." Harold felt his own eyes misting. "You were so scared, but so polite. You kept apologizing for bothering me. Do you remember what you told me when you dropped me off?" Harold thought hard, but the details were fuzzy. Sarah stepped closer, kneeling beside his wheelchair. "You said, 'Remember, sweetheart, there are good people in this world who will help you when you need it. Someday, when you're bigger and stronger, you do the same for someone else.' Then you gave me $5 for the bus, just in case it happened again." The lobby of Sunset Manor seemed to fade away as Harold was transported back to that rainy evening 36 years ago. He remembered now, the gratitude in the little girl's eyes, her mother's broken English as she tried to thank him, the warm feeling he'd carried home that night. "I kept that $5 bill," Sarah said softly. "For 36 years, I kept it in my wallet as a reminder. When I became a teacher, every time I helped a struggling student, I thought of you When I volunteered at the food bank, when I stopped to help someone with a flat tire, when I tutored kids for free, I thought of you. Harold could barely speak. But how did you find me here? Sarah smiled through her tears. I never forgot your name. Harold Matthews from Thompson's Auto Shop. When I heard you were here, I knew I had come. I've been trying to work up the courage to actually talk to you for 2 months. Heard from who? Harold asked, confused. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. From your son, David. The lobby of Sunset Manor seemed to tilt on its axis. Harold gripped the arms of his wheelchair, his knuckles white against the worn fabric. David, he whispered. You know, David? Sarah nodded slowly, settling into the chair beside him. He's been my daughter Emma's high school guidance counselor for the past 3 years. When Emma was struggling with anxiety and falling behind in her classes, David, well, he went above and beyond to help her. Harold felt like he was piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. David never mentioned. He probably didn't think it was worth mentioning, Sarah said gently. Emma Chin isn't exactly a standout student. She's quiet, struggles with math, comes from a single-parent home. Not the kind of kid who usually gets extra attention from busy school administrators. Harold's mind reeled. His son, David, the successful educator who had become too busy for his own father, had been helping this woman's daughter? The same David who claimed he couldn't find time for weekly visits or even phone calls. 3 years ago, Emma was failing algebra and having panic attacks, Sarah continued. She was convinced she was stupid, worthless. David started tutoring her after school for free. When I offered to pay him, he refused. He said education should never be about money. The irony wasn't lost on Harold. His son was giving free help to a stranger's child while his own father sat alone, counting days of silence. But that's not why I'm here, Sarah said quickly, as if reading his thoughts. When Emma graduated last spring, with honors, thanks to David's help, I wanted to thank him properly. I invited him for dinner, and that's when he told me about you. Harold's heart began to race. What did he say? Sarah's expression grew complicated. A mixture of sadness and frustration crossed her features. He said his father was the best man he'd ever known, but that he'd messed everything up and didn't know how to fix it. Mess what up? Harold asked, bewildered. Harold, Sarah said gently, David thinks you hate him. The words hit Harold like a physical blow. Hate him? Why would he think that? Sarah took a deep breath, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. He told me about the fight you had before you came here, about the things that were said. The memory came flooding back. Their last real conversation, the night before David had driven him to Sunset Manor. Harold had been scared, angry about losing his independence, terrified of being forgotten. He'd lashed out at the one person trying to help him. I called him ungrateful, Harold whispered, the words feeling like poison in his mouth. I said he was just waiting for me to die so he could sell my house and be done with his burden. And what did David say? Harold closed his eyes, remembering. He said, maybe it would be better if we both had some space to think. David told me he drove away that night and cried in his car for an hour, Sarah said softly. He said he'd never seen you look at him with such disappointment, and he didn't know how to face that. Harold felt the weight of 6 months of silence settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. All this time, he'd been waiting for David to apologize, to make the first move. But David had been waiting too, paralyzed by the fear that his father truly despised him. So you came here because of David? Harold asked. Sarah shook her head. No, Harold, I came here because of you. Because 36 years ago, you showed a scared little girl that kindness exists in the world, and that changed everything about how I saw life. David just happened to be the connection that led me to find you again. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn $5 bill, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. I told you I kept this. But what I didn't tell you is what else I kept. From the same purse, she withdrew a small, faded piece of paper. After you fixed my bike and drove me home, I was so grateful that I wrote you a thank you note. My mother helped me with the English. I was going to give it to you the next day. But when we went back to the shop, the other mechanic said you'd moved to a different job. Harold took the note with trembling hands. In a child's careful handwriting, it read, "Dear Mr. Harold, thank you for fixing my bike and driving me home. My mom says you are an angel. I will never forget your kindness. When I grow up, I want to help people just like you helped me. Your friend forever. Sarah Chun. P.S. I hope your son knows how lucky he is to have such a good dad." Harold stared at the last line, his vision blurring with tears. A 8-year-old girl had seen something in him that his own son seemed to have forgotten, and that Harold himself had begun to doubt. "Sarah," he said quietly, would you do me a favor?" "Anything. Would you call David? Would you tell him that his old man would really like to hear his voice?" Sarah smiled, already reaching for her phone. "I think I can do better than that. David asked me to call him after I finally introduce myself to you. He's been waiting in the parking lot for the past hour." Harold's head snapped up. "What?" Through the lobby windows, Harold could see a familiar BMW parked under the oak tree at the far end of the lot. Even from this distance, he could make out a figure sitting behind the wheel. "He's been coming every Wednesday for the past month," Sarah said gently. "He sits out there while I visit with you, hoping to get the courage to come inside. He's terrified you won't want to see him." Harold stared at his son's car, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. David had been here every Wednesday, just like Sarah with her flowers. David had been showing up, paralyzed by fear and regret, but unable to stay away. "Maria." Harold called to the nurse, who had been discreetly giving them privacy. "Could you help me get outside? I think it's time I talked to my son." The October afternoon air was crisp and clean as Maria wheeled Harold down the ramp toward the parking lot. Sarah walked beside them, her yellow chrysanthemums clutched in one hand, her phone in the other. "David," she spoke into the phone, "your father would like to see you now." Through the windshield of the BMW, Harold could see his son's head drop forward onto the steering wheel. Even from 50 yards away, Harold could see David's shoulders shaking. After a long moment, the car door opened and David stepped out. At 53, David Matthews looked every bit the successful high school principal he was. Pressed khakis, button-down shirt, hair neatly combed. But as he walked toward them, Harold saw past the professional exterior to the scared little boy who used to run to him with scraped knees and broken toys. They met halfway across the parking lot, near a bench under the oak tree, where the autumn leaves created a canopy of gold and red. Maria positioned Harold's wheelchair facing the bench, and David sat down heavily, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the distant traffic on Burnside Street and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Dad," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry." Harold reached out and placed his weathered hand over his son's clasped ones. "No, David, I'm the one who should apologize. The things I said that night, I was scared and angry, and I took it out on you. You were trying to help me, and I made you feel like a villain." David looked up, his eyes red with unshed tears. "But I abandoned you. I promised I'd call, and then I was too much of a coward to face you after what happened." "You didn't abandon me," Harold said firmly. "Sarah told me about Emma, about how you've been helping her. You've been doing exactly what I taught you, taking care of people who need help. I'm proud of you. But I should have been taking care of you, too." Harold squeezed his son's hands. "David, look at me." When David met his eyes, Harold continued, "Do you remember when you were 12 and you broke Mrs. Patterson's window with your baseball?" David nodded, confused by the change of subject. "You were so scared of getting in trouble that you hid in your room for 3 days. You made yourself sick with worry. Finally, I dragged you over there to apologize, and what happened?" A small smile tugged at David's lips. "She said she'd been waiting for me to come by. She'd already bought the glass to fix it herself. She just wanted to make sure I was okay." "Sometimes," Harold said gently, "the thing we're most afraid of is the thing the other person wants most. I've been sitting by that window for 6 months, waiting for you to call, while you've been sitting in this parking lot for weeks, afraid I wouldn't want to hear from you." Sarah, who had been quietly standing nearby, stepped forward. "Mr. Matthews, there's something else you should know about your son." David looked at her with alarm. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She turned to Harold. David has been paying for extras here at Sunset Manor. The premium cable package in your room, the better meal plan, the weekly housekeeping service. That's all been David. He set it up anonymously because he didn't want you to feel obligated to thank him. Harold stared at his son in amazement. David, I know it doesn't make up for not visiting, David said quickly. I just want to make sure you were comfortable. I kept telling myself I'd visit next week. When I figured out what to say, how to apologize properly. And the flowers? Harold asked Sarah, how do they fit into all this? Sarah smiled. When David told me about you, about the guilt he was carrying, I knew I had to try to help. I started visiting to see how you were doing, to maybe find a way to bridge the gap between you two. I never expected you to remember me. But I hoped that maybe if I kept showing up, I could find the right moment to tell you both that some mistakes are worth forgiving. Harold looked from Sarah to David, understanding dawning on his face. You two planned this. Not exactly, David said. Sarah has been trying to convince me to come inside for weeks. Today, she finally told me she was going to introduce herself to you, whether I was ready or not. She said it was time for all of us to stop being afraid. Harold laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. So, an 8-year-old girl I helped 36 years ago ended up helping me get my son back? The circle of kindness, Sarah said softly. You taught me that good people help each other. Today, I got to pass that lesson along. David stood up from the bench and knelt beside his father's wheelchair. Dad, I know I can't undo the past 6 months, but I'd like to try to make up for lost time. Would you maybe like to come have dinner at my house this Sunday? I make a decent pot roast. Harold's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that very much, but only if Sarah and Emma can join us. I'd like to meet the young lady you've been helping, and I owe Sarah about 36 years' worth of thank you dinners. Sarah laughed, wiping her own tears. I think Emma would love that. She's been dying to meet the man who raised a teacher who changed her life. As the three of them sat under the oak tree, surrounded by the golden light of the October afternoon, Harold realized that sometimes the best stories aren't about the things we lose, but about the unexpected ways we find them again. His son hadn't stopped loving him, and a little girl's gratitude from decades past had somehow managed to build a bridge across months of silence and fear. Sarah, Harold said, you can stop bringing flowers now, though I hope you'll keep visiting. Sarah smiled, handing him the yellow chrysanthemums. These are the last ones I'll bring as a stranger, but I have a feeling I'll be back next week as family. David helped his father back to his wheelchair, and as they made their way toward the nursing home entrance, Harold's phone buzzed with a text message. For the first time in 183 days, he wasn't afraid to look at it. The message was from David. Love you, Dad. See you Sunday. Harold typed back slowly but surely. Love you too, son. Can't wait. In the distance, the autumn sun was setting over Portland, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. But for Harold Matthews, the day felt like it was just beginning.